The silence in the penthouse was absolute. It was a vacuum, a void so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. For Alexander Vance, this silence was both his sanctuary and his prison. It was the sound of his success, a success built on a foundation of cold, hard logic and an unyielding will. At 68, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency and staggering wealth. His empire, Vance Consolidated, was a sprawling beast with tentacles in manufacturing, logistics, and technology. He had conquered markets, crushed competitors, and amassed a fortune that was less in number and more a force of nature. But the price of this empire was the silence. It was the silence of a home that had never echoed with children's laughter, the silence of a marriage that had withered and died from neglect, the silence of a life lived entirely in the future tense, always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a crystal tumbler of amber whiskey in his hand, looking down at the city that glittered like a spilled treasure chest. He owned pieces of it, of course. Skyscrapers bore his name, but from this height, it was all just geometry and light, impersonal and distant. He felt a familiar, hollow ache in his chest, a sensation he had spent decades ignoring, drowning in work and the quiet hum of his own solitude. The doctors had given it a name recently, a progressive cardiomyopathy, a weakening heart. The irony was not lost on him. They had advised rest, less stress, but his work was all he had. Without it, there was only the silence. His introspection was shattered by the sharp, insistent buzz of the intercom. His assistant's nervous voice followed. "Mr. Vance, sir. There's someone here to see you, a young woman. She's quite insistent." Alexander frowned. It was past 9. He had no appointments. "Send her away." "I tried, sir. She says her name is Lily Chun. She says it's about your son." The world stopped. The tumbler almost slipped from his grasp. His son, 2 words that carried the weight of a ghost. Daniel, the son from his brief, failed marriage to Elaine, a vibrant artist he had loved in a distant, almost theoretical past. Daniel had been the one bright, chaotic spark in Alexander's ordered life. A boy full of laughter and questions, with his mother's creative soul and a desperate, unrequited longing for his father's approval. Alexander had been too busy building his empire. He'd missed school plays, soccer games, graduations. He'd provided everything money could buy: the best schools, the finest clothes, a trust fund, but he'd never given the one thing Daniel truly wanted: his time, his presence. The rift had become a chasm. Daniel, at 18, had walked out after a furious argument. Alexander, stubborn and proud, had let him go. He'd told himself the boy would come to his senses, but Daniel hadn't. He'd cut all ties, changed his name to his mother's maiden name, Chun, and vanished into a life of his own making. That was 20 years ago. The silence that followed had been the loudest of Alexander's life, and now a woman named Lily Chun was at his door. Speaking of his son, "Send her up," Alexander said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. The elevator door slid open, and a young woman stepped into his sterile, minimalist living room. She was in her mid-20s, dressed in simple, worn jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder, but it was her face that stole the air from Alexander's lungs. She had Elaine's eyes, wide and intelligent, and Daniel's stubborn jaw. There was no mistaking it. This was his granddaughter. She stood her ground, her posture defiant, but he could see the nervous tremor in her hands. "Alexander Bonse?" she asked, her voice clear. "I am," he said, setting his glass down. "You say you're Lily Chun?" "Daniel's daughter." "I am." She looked around the opulent, soulless penthouse, her expression unimpressed. "He's gone. My dad. He died 3 weeks ago." The words were a physical blow. Alexander staggered back a step, his hand flying to his chest, where his own faulty heart was suddenly pounding a frantic, painful rhythm. Gone. The finality of it was an abyss opening at his feet. All the chances he'd squandered, all the words left unsaid, crystallized in that single, devastating moment. He had a son, and now he did not. "How?" he managed to whisper, his voice cracking. "Cancer," Lily said, her own composure starting to fracture. It was quick, in the end. He was a woodworker, a craftsman. He made beautiful furniture. He never took a penny from you. He was proud of the life he built. She said this, not with malice, but with a fierce, protective love. Alexander felt a wave of shame so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. His son, a woodworker, while he had been building empires of steel and data, his son had been creating things of beauty with his own hands. "Why are you here?" Alexander asked, his defenses rising instinctively, a fortress against the pain. "If you wanted nothing from me in life, why come to me now?" Lily's eyes flashed with a fire that was entirely her own. "I'm not here for your money. I'm here because he asked me to. He made me promise. He said to give you this." She swung her backpack off her shoulder, unzipped it, and pulled out a simple, beautifully crafted wooden box. It was made of rich, dark walnut, polished to a soft sheen. The joinery was flawless. It was a piece made with love and immense skill. She placed it on the cold, marble coffee table. "He spent the last months of his life making this for you." He said it contained all the answers. Alexander approached the box as if it were a live bomb. His hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, shook as he reached for it. There was a small, brass clasp. He opened it. Inside, there was no stack of letters, no dramatic confession. There was only a single, old key, and a folded, weathered map of a place called Cedar Ridge, a small town nestled in a valley several hundred miles away. He looked at Lily, bewildered. "What is this?" "Answers to what?" "I don't know," she said, her defiance softening into a profound sadness. "He never told me. He just said you would understand. Ordered you Holden tea. He said I was to bring it to you, and that my job was done." She shouldered her backpack again. "Goodbye, Mr. Vance." "Wait," he called out as she turned to leave. "Where will you go?" "Home," she said simply, without turning back. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and she was gone, leaving Alexander alone once more. But the silence was now different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of his son and the weight of the mysterious box. 4 days, the box sat on his table. He would circle it, pick up the key, study the map. Cedar Ridge. The name meant nothing to him. It was a speck on the map, a place his corporate jets would never fly over. What answers could possibly be there? What could this key unlock? His rational mind told him it was a fool's errand, the sentimental whim of a dying man. But the hollow ache in his chest, both emotional and physical, grew more persistent. The doctors had said to avoid stress. They had said nothing about avoiding the truth. A week later, against all his better judgment, Alexander Vance did something he hadn't done in 40 years. He embarked on a journey with no business plan, no profit motive. He dismissed his driver and his security detail. He rented a simple, unremarkable car and drove. He left the glass and steel canyons of the city and watched as they melted into sprawling suburbs, then into open countryside, and finally into the rolling, forested hills that led to Cedar Ridge. The town was exactly as the map promised. Small, quiet, nestled in a green valley with a river running through it. It was a world away from his life. People on the street moved slowly, greeting each other by name. He felt like an alien, his tailored suit and luxury sedan glaringly out of place. He checked into the only inn, a quaint, slightly shabby place called the River's Rest. The key felt heavy in his pocket. He showed it to the elderly innkeeper. "Do you know what this might open?" The innkeeper, a man with a kind, weathered face, squinted at the key. "That's old Silas's key. Fits the old community workshop down by the mill. Been closed for years. Your boy Daniel said someone might come for it." Alexander's breath hitched. "Daniel, you knew him?" "Knew him. Course I knew him. Fine man. fine craftsman. He came here about 15 years ago, bought the old workshop. Said he liked the quiet. He fixed it up real nice. Shame, what happened? The innkeeper's eyes held a genuine sorrow. The workshop is just down the road, on Elm Street. You can't miss it. With a heart thudding painfully against his ribs, Alexander walked to Elm Street. There, sitting beside a babbling creek, was a charming, rustic building with a sign that read, Chun's Woodcraft. The windows were dark. It was locked. With a trembling hand, he took out the key. It slid into the lock smoothly, and with a solid clunk, the door opened. He stepped inside, and the smell hit him first, the rich, comforting scent of cedar, pine, and varnish. It was his son's scent. The workshop was clean and organized, a testament to Daniel's character. Finished pieces of furniture, a elegant rocking chair, a dining table with intricate inlay stewed covered in sheets, waiting for owners who would never come. Tools hung neatly on pegboards. Sketches and plans were pinned to a corkboard, but it was the back of the workshop that drew his eye. A large object stood there, covered by a heavy canvas dropcloth. Drawn by a force he couldn't resist, Alexander walked over and, with a deep breath, pulled the cloth away. What was revealed was not a piece of furniture. It was a city. A miniature, breathtakingly detailed model city, carved entirely from wood. And he recognized it instantly. It was his empire. There was the Vance Tower, its every window painstakingly etched. There were the manufacturing plants, the distribution centers, the docks. It was a perfect, scaled-down replica of his life's work, a monument to his ambition. But as he looked closer, his blood ran cold. The city was empty. There were no tiny wooden people on the streets, no cars on the roads. The windows of the towers were dark. It was a ghost city, a beautiful, intricate shell. It was the empire he had built, rendered in stunning detail, and it was utterly, profoundly lifeless. And then he saw it. In the very center of the model, in the plaza of the main tower, was a single, small wooden figure. It was a man in a suit, his head bowed, his hands in his pockets. He was alone. The sculpture was titled, on a small brass plaque at its base, My Father's Kingdom. The answer. It struck Alexander with the force of a physical blow. He fell to his knees on the sawdust-covered floor. Great, ragged sobs, tearing from his chest. This was his son's final, devastating message. This is what you built, Father. A kingdom of incredible scale and complexity. A masterpiece of ambition. And it is empty. And you are alone in the center of it. All the answers were here. The answer to why Daniel left. The answer to the hollowness Alexander had felt his entire life. He had spent his life building a monument, not a home. He had accumulated wealth, but not love. He had commanded respect, but earned no affection. His kingdom was indeed magnificent, and it was a prison of his own making. He didn't know how long he knelt there, weeping for the son he had lost, for the time he had wasted, for the man he had become. When the storm of his grief finally subsided, he felt raw, shattered, but somehow cleaner. The silence in the workshop was no longer accusing. It was waiting. He stood up, wiping his eyes. He looked around his son's workshop, at the evidence of a life spent creating beauty, of touching lives in this small town. He thought of Lily, her fierce independence, and her courage. Alexander Vance walked out of the workshop a different man. He didn't lock the door. He went back to the inn and called his lawyers. The orders he gave were unprecedented. He was not selling. He was dismantling. Vance Consolidated would be broken apart, its divisions sold off to the employees through a massive stock option plan. The majority of his wealth would be transferred to a foundation in Daniel's name, dedicated to funding arts education and supporting craftspeople and tradesmen. He then found Lily. It wasn't hard. She was living in a small apartment above a bookstore in the next town over. When he showed up at her door, she looked at him with wary suspicion. "I'm not here to disrupt your life," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I understand the box. I understand the answers. And I was wondering if the offer still stands. If I could see your home. Your father's home. Lily studied his face, and for the first time, she saw not the intimidating billionaire, but a tired, grieving old man. She saw the ghost of her father in his eyes. She nodded slowly and stepped aside. The home was modest, filled with Daniel's beautiful, handcrafted furniture. It was warm and lived in, and full of love. Photographs covered the walls, pictures of Daniel and Lily, of holidays, of birthdays, a life Alexander had never been part of. Alexander Vance did not return to his penthouse. He bought a small house in Cedar Ridge, near his son's workshop, which he reopened as a community arts center, managed by Lily. He learned to work with wood, his hands, once used only for signing documents, now growing calloused and strong. He didn't build empires. He built birdhouses and bookshelves. He found a quiet, profound joy in the simple act of creation. The city in his penthouse was sold, the proceeds joining the foundation. The silence was finally, truly broken. It was replaced by the sound of birds in the morning, the chatter of neighbors, the whir of a lathe in the workshop, and the sound of his granddaughter's laughter. He had spent a lifetime building a kingdom of solitude. In the end, he found his fortune not in a corporate empire, but in the dusty, sweet-smelling silence of a woodshop. In the legacy of a son he finally understood, and in the second chance he found in a small town called Cedar Ridge. His heart, the doctors would later note with surprise, grew. It had finally found a reason to beat.